Hi, I'm Don Moores, and welcome to Montgomery Weekend Review. The Chesapeake Bay is one of our most valuable resources. Mark Bryer, who directs the Nature Conservancy's Chesapeake Bay programs, he's an expert on the bay, will tell us about the oysters, which are an important part of our ecosystem. Recent tragedy in Orlando continues to affect Montgomery County. Graciela Rivera-Oven, who comments on this for this program on a regular basis, will tell us about 4 young victims who died in the tragedy. There are several ways that victims of domestic violence in our community can be protected by the judicial system, although no method is perfect. Bryan Lee, a local attorney, is here to explain. Montgomery County Sentinel has a new feature called Transparency Watch. Executive editor Brian Karem, someone who has been very concerned about transparency his whole life as one of the world's or the country's leading journalists, is here to tell us all about the new feature. Mark, welcome.
Thank you.
Your first time on the show, and so a special welcome.
Thanks so much.
Your work is fascinating. For the Nature Conservancy, you're directing the Chesapeake Bay efforts. Maybe before we get into oysters,
Sure.
Maybe you can give us a little bit of an overview about what you do, Nature Conservancy, and what you're trying to achieve in the Bay.
Thanks, Don. Nature Conservancy is a large nonprofit, works all over the world, across all 50 states. Here in Maryland, based in Bethesda, just a few miles down the road from the studio. Around the Bay, we're really focused on clean water. And there's a lot of different ways you can get at clean water, reducing pollution from cities, from agriculture, and from oysters.
Well, all right, it's a great segue into the oysters. I'm fascinated by oysters. I don't know. Just last week I was with oyster farmers in Cape Cod,
Right.
talking in different worlds than here. But one of the things they were talking about was the filtering aspects of an oyster, which is so important with a watershed.
Right, so clean water, one of the biggest problems in the Chesapeake right now is we don't have enough clean water. Fish, crabs, other things are really struggling as a result, and people can't swim. Oysters can filter about 50 gallons a day, a single oyster can.
A little oyster.
A little oyster, 50 gallons a day, just an amazing amount of water. About 400 years ago, John Smith sailed up this estuary, and oysters were a navigational hazard. They were literally popping out of the water. Some of the ships ran aground as a result. Today we have very few of them. And the great news is in the last decade or so, I think we've figured out a lot on science and a lot on policy and a lot on investment on how to bring oysters back, and we're really seeing things change.
Was it pollution or overfeeding that destroyed the population?
Yeah, it's a combination of all those things. So a lot of overharvest over a long period of time, a lot of pollution. John Smith days, maybe a few 10,000 people. Today, 18 million.
Now, 18 million people, Nature Conservancy, filtering, and all that stuff on your website.
Yeah.
So what is that website?
Nature.org.
Okay, easy.
Easy.
Easy, and then they can search within there.
They can find out Chesapeake Bay and find out about the work that we're doing with a lot of different people to restore oysters.
This is a $20 million project that we were talking about earlier?
So yeah, great point. Here in Maryland, we actually have the largest oyster restoration project on the planet. If you sat on the steps of the of the Lincoln Memorial, look down the mall to the Capitol, a project on the eastern shore and one of the tributaries is larger than all of that green space. It's a mammoth project. It cost about $30 million, which sounds like a lot, but it's about the same cost. I was doing some math the other day, about the same cost as repaving a 10-mile stretch of 270.
Cheaper than a tank.
Cheaper than a tank, cheaper than a plane.
And so in that area, I know that oysters, the spores they produce, you can, one oyster can be responsible for what, millions?
Millions. Right, so let's just talk for a second about the benefits of oysters. We love to eat them. They also filter water.
Can we eat them though? Is it okay?
We can eat them.
Okay.
They're safe.
I shouldn't feel guilty.
You should not feel guilty. We can talk
Except
about
in
that.
certain months.
But they filter, they provide habitat for fish and crabs. Rockfish that many of you probably have heard of.
Right.
They're called rockfish because oyster rocks form and those fish like
The
to hang
striped
out on
bass, that was a
Exactly.
difficult, that was a endangered species not so many years ago.
It was not doing well a long time ago, and it's doing much better now.
Okay.
So we're getting a lot of that habitat back.
Are you called Mr. Oyster?
I am not called Mr.
How do you
Oyster.
pronounce it? How do you pronounce an oyster in Chesapeake Bay lingo?
It depends on what part of
The accent.
the Tidewater area you're from. Many call it oyster.
Oyster.
Oyster
Okay.
With crackers?
with crackers.
So is there, Mark, is there a place where people can take their kids to kind of see like a
Great
conservation
question.
place where you can actually
Great
see and
question.
learn more about them?
So there's a lot of science I mentioned before that comes into play in figuring out how to do this better, cheaper. The University of Maryland's a real leader in this, and on the eastern shore around Cambridge, Maryland, Don, you mentioned Cambridge, is the University of Maryland's Horn Point Lab.
Oh,
They
okay.
have tours there. You can see the spat being produced. These are
Okay.
baby oysters being
Pretty
produced.
cool.
Right.
Amazing.
Okay.
Really good stuff.
I've actually heard that term spat before. So I've actually had a little bit of exposure to this. I've seen at various places. Personally, I've up at a local brewery at Flying Dog up in Frederick. I've seen at events they have little recycling stations for
Right.
shells
Right.
in order to, I guess, cultivate new generations of oysters. Are there any other
Wait a minute, they
local
recultivate
And
the
how does
shells?
that work?
So
Yeah,
one
how
of the
does
most,
it work?
right, so lining the streets of Baltimore and many other places are oyster shells that were crushed up and made
Right.
into concrete.
Right.
We need to put those oysters back so when the baby oysters are floating around, they have something to land on and attach to. That's why you need to recycle those oysters. So
Makes sense.
if you're out eating oysters, make sure the shells, ask your restaurateur, make sure you recycle those oysters.
Just throw them back in the bay.
And you need to throw them back in the bay, absolutely.
We got about a minute
Sure.
left. What do you hope to see? Let's look ahead 5 years, 10 years. Mark, you're going to be a happy man.
I will be a happy man.
What happens?
So one of the bold, ambitious goals was to restore 10 of the Chesapeake tributaries with oysters. Millions and millions and millions of oysters, hundreds of acres of reef. We have one right now. This is
Okay.
Harris Creek, the one I mentioned. In 10 years, I want 9 more. I want to have 10. And governments, nonprofits like ours and others have made that commitment.
Is that a commendable? I mean, it's a commendable goal. Can you do it?
It's doable. It's absolutely
One a
doable.
year.
One a year for the next 10 years. 2025, we'll have 10. We have funding support from Congress. We hope from the state as well, and a lot of work from nonprofits and others like ours.
When Senator Van Hollen, or when Congressman Van Hollen becomes senator, we'll make sure we keep mentioning this to him and keep supporting. Mark, thank you so much.
My
This was
pleasure.
great, and I hope you'll make it here again.
I would love to. Thank you.
There's so much more that I want to hear about the Bay.
Lots more.
and talk about. We go from growth. We talk from an optimistic story to one that continues to reverberate all around us. Gracie, thank you very much for being here. And I did not know there was a local connection to the Orlando
Yeah.
awfulness.
Yes, unfortunately there is, and we actually had an event in memory of those students at the Ana G. Mendes University.
Tell us a bit about the Ana G. Mendes
So
University
the Ana G.
first.
Mendes University system is a system. It's the largest university system in Puerto Rico, and over a decade ago, they actually started a satellite in Orlando, Florida. It's a bilingual university.
But up here, but we had the
Right.
here in Wheaton.
Right, and in Wheaton, about 5 years ago, they moved into Wheaton,
Okay.
and we actually just had our first nursing program graduating class. This was our third commencement, and we had about 15 nurses, all
Okay.
local, who graduated with their RN degrees.
And
So-
and Ana G. Mendes, if I remember from having
Yeah.
gone over there, it's bilingual education.
It's
so being taught in
bilingual.
Spanish and English.
Yes. So the whole point of it is you have so many Latinos who have degrees in their home countries, especially in nursing or education, and making the transition sometimes is very difficult. So Ana G. Mendes recognizes a lot of those credits, and then they help you navigate and get your bachelor's or master's degrees.
No hay problema.
No hay problema. so it's great. So so for us, the graduation time is such an exciting time for everybody, and
Sure.
we were getting ready and so on. And unfortunately, the Orlando massacre really brought it home what happened. We lost 4 of our students, and a few of them were actually injured as well. And a couple of them were supposed to graduate
Oh, boy.
like a Saturday later. And these are folks who work really, really hard to go back to school.
Right.
They usually work 2 jobs, and then they go to school at night on the weekends.
Can you tell more about the?
One of the stories that really resonated with me was because we actually had to help the family get a visa and so on from Venezuela to be able to come and claim the body of their loved one. This young man whose family, saved everything up for him to come to the United States so he could finish his schooling, because the situation in Venezuela is not very stable.
Horrible.
And just escaped, what was going on in
Okay.
Venezuela. And he did what he was supposed to do. He worked hard. He went to school. He was supposed to be graduating, and they had just finished exams, so they went to celebrate. You know, Latino night at this club was Latino night, so everybody went, and moms went with their kids. You know, it was just a very festive mood. It's very near the campus, so you could actually walk to it. And so that's why some of the students went to celebrate the end of the semester and the fact that a few of them were graduating. And unfortunately, we all know how that ended.
Y'all did a memorial event here, yes?
Yeah, what was that
We
like?
did. We did a memorial event a couple of weeks ago. So the students, you know, from Wheaton felt, because it was, you know, it was also an attack on the Latino community. It was like a hate crime, of a sense, and we did an event in memory of it, but also to talk about people's differences and acceptance and respect. And it was a wonderful memorial in memory of these students. We had people from the media there. Armando Trull from NPR was there as well, and you know, he did incredible.
So it's Nadia Palacios from the Sentinel, but that's another story.
Oh, okay.
So
Are
Yeah.
you finding that it's going to affect enrollment, or is it inspiring people to come even more to the university?
You know, I had to tell you, in our graduation, people think because it's a Spanish university or whatever, we actually had a couple of people who are not. We had a student in nursing from Korea. We had a student from Africa graduating in nursing because they wanted. In his case, he is trilingual, and he always wanted to learn. You know, and he wants to be a nurse. And he said in the area where he wants to practice, he has to be fluent. So it was an incredible commencement
Well,
program.
my question
So
for you, and I know
about
you're-
45 seconds left.
My big question: do you see violence towards Latinos increasing during this political climate, decreasing, or staying the same? Or do you think the media is making too much of it?
no, I think it has increased. I think it's just now being noticeable, and I think that resentment has always been there, and now it's okay for people to say that they're not wanted here. Like there's a platform out there that is okay to say it openly. As before, I think it was more of, you know, that was not okay, and now suddenly it's okay.
So leave us with what the Orlando tragedy, 15 seconds, the future for MG, how will the
So
school?
I think, you know,
10 seconds.
Ana Jimenez is going to keep on embracing all the students, you know, and to help them achieve their dreams as
And-
before.
Thank you very much. We'll be right back after these messages. And we're back. Bryan Lee, welcome. Like Mark, this is your first time on the show, so I
Pleasure to be here.
special welcome. Now, again, we go still to things, not the tragedy of death, but the tragedy of domestic violence. It's astounding to me that domestic violence continues to plague so many households. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about what the state of domestic violence is, and then we'll go into a little bit about how people can protect themselves.
Absolutely. I mean, domestic violence in general has been around forever. I mean,
Right.
and solutions to solving that or enforcing some sort of protection are very difficult. It's complicated issues don't really have simple answers. The basics of protective orders and peace orders, what people need to know really are that the court can offer protection as a civil order depending upon the relationship between the parties. Okay.
So you're looking at, so as I understand domestic violence in the great majority of cases, it gets down to two issues. I mean, it's money and kids are present. And so tell us a little bit of, I mean, you've got a protective order, but you've got the kids present and you've got a spouse. Often, I don't want to say it's always the woman, because domestic violence can go both ways, but in a typical case, it's a woman with kids. So
Well,
what
absolutely.
what are we looking at?
A protective order can give not only a spouse protection, they can also get protection for children if there are children involved. Temporary custody can also be granted by a court in appropriate situations. Now, with regard to the motivations behind obtaining a protective order, and basically and one of the flaws of protective orders is that it requires some sort of an act of abuse or assault or harassment or threat. And a lot of times that may be too little too late, or at the same time, even if you do obtain this protection from the courts, they're limited in what they can do.
And it
Well,
wasn't
that's one of the things I hear from victims all the time is that a protective order was great in name, but it didn't do anything to help
Correct.
them
because
out.
the judge isn't going to the house to stand at the door.
Well, and plus, I mean, it's a piece of paper. If someone's going to do you bodily harm, they're going to do you bodily harm.
Do we have statistics to tell us how much, how well these things actually work, the protective orders?
I mean, I don't have any statistics offhand,
Yeah.
but I mean, in terms of how well they work, I mean, that's largely a case-by-case
Sure.
determination. I mean, really, just like it was mentioned before, having a protective order does not prevent a determined individual who is
Right.
just focused on committing some kind of harm from doing something like that. There's no guard being posted at the door. There's no, law enforcement doing patrols because someone has a protective order. It's largely left up to the person who sought the protective order in order to let the authorities or the court know that there's been some sort of a violation or that someone has come back. Now, obviously, if there is some sort of threat of violence, for instance, if there's firearms involved or weapons, or there's a history showing that the other person is going to cause some sort of harm, may cause some sort of harm, once again, there's not that much the courts can do about that.
So what do you find a protective order is good for?
Well, really, protective orders are deterrents more so than anything else. And most people do follow an order from the court. It's not an everyday occurrence where people just go out and violate court orders. So they have force behind them. Most people do not go out
And usually when you get it, you back the next week anyway for the follow, right? When you
Well,
go, like initially,
Get a
you get a temporary, and then you go back again.
So basically, it's a due process concern, so that the other party, if they're being accused of some sort of violence or
Right.
act, that they have an ability to go and defend themselves against a protective order.
Right.
Now, if it's granted, then at that point, that protective order goes into effect, and there are various provisions, for instance, handing over firearms or weapons along those lines, and also staying away from home or places of employment or schools in terms of children.
Let me ask you this. Not so many years ago, there were a lot of complaints, and we've got about a minute, so I want to make sure. There were complaints that most of the judges didn't take the victims posing that there was a domestic violence threat as seriously as they should. It seems to me there's been a lot of education among the judges, the whole law enforcement as well as judicial system. How would you say?
I would say that it's definitely, the environment has definitely improved. People definitely take domestic violence much more seriously these days than previously. There's a lot more, like as you said, education. And also the political atmosphere is much more focused on making sure that people get protection that they need.
10 seconds left. Any final words on this? There's so much more we could talk about.
I mean, the state of things are, people just need to know what they need to do in order to get the protection that they can get through the courts, but they also need to know the limitations in order to protect themselves and not to be shy about contacting the authorities if something happens, and to also recognize other people's domestic situations and possible situations of abuse that's not being reported.
Thank you very much for this.
Thank you for having me.
And if there is reporting and it's not being taken seriously,
Here we are.
Transparency Watch.
You got it. That's our new watchword, Transparency Watch. We're trying to hold the government's feet to the fire to make sure that they provide the information they're required to supply to us in a timely fashion.
Brian Karem,
Good to see you,
editor,
Don.
publisher, not publisher, editor of the Sentinel
Newspaper.
Newspapers. And where can we find the Sentinel Newspapers?
TheSentinel.com. And you can also find it at 7-Elevens. You can subscribe to it because we're a subscription-based newspaper too.
Which is what I do.
God bless you.
But one of the things that you talk about, and welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Is how you are the last remaining newspaper
In the county.
in the county, and I think this Transparency Watch seems to me to be exactly what a newspaper in this county needs to be doing.
I agree. We have a numerous number of people in public information offices and who believe that their goal is to obfuscate and rather than provide us with information, provide us with disinformation.
Whoa. I would believe that they would say that they're organizing the information in a way to
You
make
make
it
an excellent spin
understandable,
doctor, sir.
to make it understandable by the constituents.
All I request is that they provide us with the information in a timely fashion and provide us the information that they're supposed to provide us under the Freedom of Information Act. And we have there are some really bad centers, and
Let me ask you the question. What are some of the bad centers?
Montgomery County Public Schools is probably the worst.
Okay.
They obfuscate routinely. They keep information from us. We had a story this week, simple story, 2 new associate superintendents. All we wanted to do was 5-minute conversation, find out what's going on with them, moving in office. We're told, can't talk to them. They're busy. Send us an email. You're limited to 2 questions.
Okay, so
We
MCPS.
Yeah.
What's the second center before we get into the details? What's the
The
second?
other big center is Rockville City. In the past, they've obfuscated very well. They wouldn't even provide us with a picture of one time. It took a week to get a picture of something that was on display in a local museum, so it was tough.
Is Transparency Watch going to be a regular feature in the paper?
Once a
What's
week.
it
We're gonna, we have 2 awards. One's called Walls, for those who are putting up walls to information, and Windows, and that's for the people who are doing their job well and
Going to try to
doing it
balance
right.
each week? a
Trying to
little bit?
balance it. We want people to know who's doing well and who's not. I
So,
mean, it's not right to just nail one guy and
So-
not give the other guy laurels.
So who gets Windows this week?
Neil Greenberger is probably one of the best public information officers in the county. We
Tell us
also
about Neil. Tell us what.
Neil has, and when it comes to county information and county council, he helps provide us with, he goes above and beyond Call of Duty, helping provide information to the press and assisting them in getting to the public officials who make the policy and making sure that we can talk to them, and that's very important.
Why do you think that you're encountering such problems from the walls, as you say?
I think the problem is when people don't understand that, first of all, I'm a reporter, you don't have to like me. And trust me, there are plenty who don't. But it would be nice if you would merely supply us with the information that you're supposed to supply us with. And a lot of public information officers feel that their job is to protect their charges rather than provide us with information. It's the exact wrong attitude.
So do you think they're acting? Oh, go
Sorry,
ahead.
no, I was just thinking, especially about a public agency that is supposed to be transparent to the public.
So you think it's more of a sense of duty that they're blocking you from certain information,
Well,
as opposed
it's
to fear of the media or something like that?
It breaks down to about 3 things: fear of the media, protecting their bosses, or they're doing something wrong. You don't know which it is.
So
But do you think the Windows aspect is going to help turn the walls into
I
Windows?
hope so. I hope they understand that I'm not asking for anything special, just the information in a timely fashion. It's not like I want something that you're not supposed to give me. I don't want to know what you're doing on your off hour. I just want
So
to know
I'm just curious to know, how was your experience with the whole 911 issue going down? Were you able to get
I thought
information?
I thought the county was very forthcoming. As you know, we were down. The 911 system was down for 2 hours this week, and there were 2 people that died because of it. There is now an investigation ongoing because of it, and the county once again was very forthcoming with information in a timely fashion to assist us. And that is what. Look, mistakes are going to happen.
Right.
But it's how you deal with it. Like with Nixon, they always say it wasn't the break-in, it was the cover-up. Don't cover it up, just tell us what's going on.
I was thinking there's going to be another category: walls, windows, and maybe balls. In terms of those who go above and beyond. to
Yeah,
come up.
there
But
are some people who
question
do
I have
that.
for you, real quick, is this county is so much of a kumbaya. We have to all get along. We all have to talk. When you're coming in with transparency, you're coming in with what's going to be criticism. Isn't that so anti-Montgomery County in terms of what it projects itself as, where everybody is so loving and getting along?
Well, you know what? I have yet to see that loving and getting all along. I've seen a lot of sniping in government, one at each other, and nobody seems to get along. I just want them to provide us with the information. That's all. It's a real simple thing.
Fair enough.
You're a simple man,
I've heard that. Be a simple man.
and we like you. We've grown to like you.
God bless you.
He said growth.
Folks, I want to say thank you so much for being here with me today. And I want to thank all of you in the viewing audience for joining us for this week's edition of Montgomery Weekend Review. I'm Don Moores, inviting you to join us again next week at this very same time.